For you newer Crayon Eaters out there, Solar Titan is a subclass that's had a very long and weird history. From its hype-fueled reveal back in the pre-Taken King Vidoc back in 2015, to its relegation to nothing more than a melting point bot for the first 2 years of Destiny 2. Post Shadowkeep, it kind of remained in this limbo state until its resurgence due to the 3.0 solo rework in Season 17. To this day, since said rework, the changes to Sunbreaker combined with the changes to allow both normal and charged melees to be bound separately gave birth to one of the strongest solo builds to ever grace the Destiny franchise, especially one of the strongest solo builds across the 5 main subclasses, not including Prismatic. So everyone should know it. The cornerstone of this build is the BONK hammer, otherwise known as the Throbbing hammer. The goal of this build is to spam both cure and restoration effects through getting a massive amount of kills with this hammer, which can actually put out some serious DPS thanks to a few factors, the first being Synthoceps, granting 200% bonus melee damage plus 50% bonus super damage when surrounded. If you wanted to pick something like Lorelei for the increased survivability over Synthoceps, that is an option. However, offense is often the best defense, and with this build that is definitely the case, which is further encapsulated in our first aspect, Roaring Flames, giving us times 3 more ability damage, including our melee, due to ability kills. So Invictus, that being the other aspect, is how we're going to get restoration through sunspots, which will be generated through ability kills. It also grants the Hammer of Soul Super the ability to create sunspots, making this our super of choice. Consecration, while fun, consumes our melee ability, hence why we won't be using it. As for fragments, Solars for longer restoration and radiant effect, combined with torches, which is how we'll be getting radiant through melee hits, are in my opinion a must for this build, with the other two fragments being largely up to you, with me choosing Empyrean in order to extend restoration and radiant, with the final being Siren. The reason I picked Siren is because while the weapons are almost entirely up to you in this build, using an incandescent weapon with Siren allows you to get your hammer back incredibly fast should you lose it. Enemies lag, they TP, they act weird. While you should be hitting the majority of your hammers, you will miss some occasionally, and as a result I like to have Zulu's, yes I call it Zulu's Bane, as a backup in order to get my hammer back incredibly fast, as losing your hammer in say a solo flawless dungeon can mean instant death. Now on to stats. Please ignore my current stat distribution. 80 recovery is abysmal. You should not be stacking this high into recovery. I just haven't been asked to sort out my armor in dim yet. As for what stats you should be going for, resilience is a must. It is still the best stat in the game, and 30% increased damage resistance is very good for survivability, which is the whole point of this build. The only other two stats worth building into are Discipline for more healing grenades, which we use as a last resort in areas where we can't get kills with our hammer, or Intellect for the increased super, which does more damage as a result for Synthoceps. Which one you build more into is largely up to you. I would take Discipline over Intellect personally, but do not even bother stacking into the other three. Mobility is completely useless on a Titan, and Recovery and Strength are useless due to the mass amount of regeneration and the massive amount of infinite melees we get from our build. As for mods, to wrap up the end of this build, there's only really two key mods I recommend, with the rest being up to you. The first being Heavy-Handed, which as we're getting infinite melee kills, will generate infinite orbs. This is why I use a Font of Focus and a Font of Wisdom to get both more super and more grenade abilities. I would ideally not use Font of Focus, however my stats are awful. The second mod I recommend is a Siphon mod for, again, even more orbs. I use Solar Siphon as I'll be using a solar weapon, as I imagine most of you will be doing with this build. I also recommend 2 time dilations in the boots, as I normally would use a Font of Restoration, but like I just said, Recovery is a useless stat with this build, with the rest of the mods being up to you. As for the artifact, to be honest, there is pretty much no mod in the artifact currently that buffs this build at all, which in my opinion is a good thing because it shows that the power of this build is for the most part consistent across seasons unless Bungie decides to hit it with the nerf hammer. Normally here, I would talk about how to use the build, but there's not really much to say. It's literally just throw hammers, get kills, do more damage with your hammers, throw more hammers, and rinse repeat while you remain entirely invincible at all times, or almost entirely invincible. It is a very tightened build in that regard. One tip I would recommend, however, is exercising restraint with your super. While Hammer of Soul, just like other Roman supers, have been buffed to get it back 3 times more quickly in the newest patch, I recommend using this super, not spamming it, but instead using it as a last resort, as the sunspot you generate plus the 55% damage resistance you'll get at the same time will save your life in instances where you either don't have your hammer, don't have your healing grenade, or both. So you should save your super and not throw it out willy-nilly unless it's something like an easy strike, in which case who cares. Also note, Synthoceps will last for about 5 seconds when you're no longer surrounded. It will linger for that amount of time. So while you don't need to be surrounded by enemies 100% of the time, you should take note on the left side of the screen when you don't have the buff, as certain enemies will be able to tank a hammer without Synthoceps at higher level difficulties, and you don't want to get one shot because you thought you could kill it when you actually couldn't. 2 final reminders: Surrounded requires 3 enemies in order to proc Synthos, and your hammer has a 1.5 second cooldown upon picking it up. So while almost instant and quick enough that you should be spamming your hammer, you should take note of that very low cooldown. The rest of the video is just gameplay with the build so you can see it in action. Thanks for watching, and feel free to subscribe if you want to, or don't, whatever you want to do. 2 quick final reminders for the build. First, in order to proc Synthoceps perk, you must be surrounded by 3 enemies, so just keep an eye out for that. Second of all, your hammer has a 1.5 second cooldown upon picking it up. This is quick enough that you should be spamming your hammer to get kills, radiant, and restoration. However, you should keep note of the very small cooldown in case you're right next to an enemy when you pick it up and you're not able to burst it down instantly. So just keep these 2 things in mind. The rest of the video is just gameplay with the build so you can see it in action. Thanks for watching, and if you want to see more builds, feel free to like and subscribe, or don't, whatever you want to do.
Nora, the worm breeding ground is clear of swarm. For now, anyway.
They'll be back, I'm sure. But your efforts continue to hold them off.